And also, if I could have either side, one person kind of at least tell what is among the people who are interested in the topic, what is one thing that you would like to understand today when it comes to the big data analytics in the cloud? That is the topic. What's one thing that I would like to get out of this discussion? Anyone?
Security.
Ditto.
Perfect. Anyone else? Any other interest? Perfect.
The challenges that you've faced and how you've addressed those?
Excellent. So, 6 of us, the topic itself is pretty broad and wide. 6 of us are going to talk probably 3 topics, all merging into one discussion, which is big data, analytics, and cloud. This is a question, you'll probably get a gift card if you answer it right. What is the percentage of cloud usage in financial institution today? Anybody? Close guess. 30? I heard 30, 50. Any other answer? Google? Hopefully it's authentic and they're talking more financial institutions which are smaller size. There is an organization called Cloud Security Alliance. They have done the survey. And what's the highest number I heard? 91? Okay. Nobody, what's the closest? I'm trying to get something very, very close. So I heard 30, 50, 91, 22.
The question itself is a little misleading. If you're a single app in the cloud, a vendor app, then you're counted as users.
Correct. Correct.
If that's the case, and if you if you use a SaaS application, most of those are hosted on Azure or Amazon these days, and that means you check box. But as we work with large banks, small banks, credit unions, it's still an industry that's way behind in terms of adoption compared to pharmaceuticals, manufacturing, transportation, and other verticals.
Okay, so the statistics is, I'm assuming it's authentic, 61%. And 78% of the organizations are currently either they are on a cloud journey already, or they are developing a cloud strategy for them. About 46% for people who use cloud in some form, but 46% of their analytics is on public cloud. And about in the last 3 years alone, the cloud-based, even the BI platforms, whether it's data management or otherwise, they have grown from 23 to 43%. Sorry.
These statistics, are they for public, hybrid, private cloud? What kind of cloud?
Okay, so I do have a stat on that. For the organizations who are using cloud, which is about 46%, right, for analytics, among them, about 46%, as I said, are using public, 30% in hybrid, about 24% in private. Among the 46% statistics, the adoption stat. So it's a very interesting topic. So it's very clear that leading organizations, banks, credit unions are recognizing data, especially the big data analytics, is going to be what's going to put them ahead of their competition. It's also very clear cloud migration is increasingly popular. And there's a compelling argument coming from the vendors saying that, hey, if you have to focus on business and decisions around the business using data, you focus on that while we take care of the infrastructure and other issues, right? And also it's very, very clear, fintechs have clearly demonstrated that by using data behind, they can actually really capture the most profitable segments very, very quickly before you even think they could do that, right? So with all that, so there are a lot of questions around it. Has a financial industry of your size successfully used big data analytics in the cloud? What worked and did not work for them in their journey? What did they learn? What kind of security concerns they have actually addressed it already? And the last one, okay, after being on the journey for some time, what is the business value accomplished? That's kind of how we're going to basically run these topics. Hopefully it covers the audience interest as well. I'm going to have two different opportunities for the audience to also come with the questions. So with that, I'll introduce me, and then I'll ask the panelists to introduce, and then we'll get started. I'm Balaji, CEO for Decision Minds, about 25 years of industry experience in helping organizations with their data and digital journey. Worked with a number of organizations that includes Wells Fargo, Bank of the West, First Republic, Fannie Mae, Facebook, ServiceNow, and so on. I would like to share my experience along with these experts. With that, and I really want to thank all the panelists, and some of them actually have taken very, very eventful flight with the right wing actually having some problems. So thank you for all making the time to come here. With that, if I can ask you to introduce a couple of minutes and then also give you a perspective on the topic, that will be useful.
My name is Kalyana Sundaram. I am the Senior Vice President and I run IT at First Tech. I've been with First Tech about little over 3 years. It's been a wonderful journey with partnering with Naveen and rest of the teams in terms of migrating to the cloud and new technologies and so on. So my expertise in this panel is going to be around security and the cloud, migrations, the lessons learned, and so on.
And you all know me, right? So I'm sitting here with two partners. Kalyana, I'm his customer because on the IT side, he wants to make sure that cloud is ready. It is all, security is all there. Network is all working. Everything is working great from performance point of view. And the other hand, I have Vamsi from Hortonworks, and I want to make sure that from the big data perspective, the platforms are performing as expected, right? So it is nice to be together with you.
And Matt to the discussion as well, right?
Yes.
Because it runs in Azure. So,
Yes.
So Vamsi, I'm the GM for banking at Hortonworks. And prior to coming to Hortonworks, I spent about 8 years at Red Hat as the lead architect for banking and financial services worldwide. So my day-to-day job involves meeting clients across the globe, literally. I've traveled to about 15 countries in the last 1 year. And these span, obviously, the credit unions, the large banks, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, wealth managers, name any institution in banking. They're all looking at big data as a way to drive, as I say, data is oil of the banking business. And I think what's interesting in the industry is that a couple of years ago, big data was a bit of a leap of faith for a lot of the banks, and cloud was something they were looking at, and majority of them building private clouds. But I think you're at a point where most serious financial institutions that want to have a more integrated customer experience, want to gain more market share from their customers, are all investing in proof of concepts and quite often running them in the cloud as a simple way to set things up and tear things down, whatever have you. So it's been a fantastic ride so far, and glad to be here.
My name is Matt Winkler. I've been at Microsoft for the last 11 or 12 years, and right now I run the program management team for our machine learning business. And for the last 7 years, prior to this, I ran our program management team for big data, building out a number of our big data services in the cloud, partnering with Hortonworks, and a number of other folks. And I've had a front row seat. I've been working in Azure since before we called it Azure. And so I've gotten across a wide variety of industries, gotten to see how customers have changed their perceptions about the cloud. And then really recently, over the last few years, really seen just the pace of innovation, particularly with our big data and analytics and machine learning type workloads, just really start to do kind of magical things. And that's really across across industries. And it gets to some of the points the previous speaker was making about understanding your customer and about being able to get that insight. And so for me, it's a lot of fun to see customers on the journey and look forward to chatting about this.
Hello, my name is Mark Tunnison. I'm a CIO at Neustar. And for those of you who don't know who we are, Neustar is started out as a number portability company. So we actually serve the telco industry. We provide the management of phone numbers between carriers. That's how we got started. And so we're now morphed into an identity company. So we know everything about the mobile, wireline, and wireless phone numbers and who's using them, what they do with them, et cetera. So we've got a wealth of data and have now pivoted from this number portability business into an analytics company, and it's a huge journey. My role as a CIO, obviously, I have part of my role is back office technology, servicing the company, but then also I'm responsible for all of the analytic infrastructure and product infrastructure that is deployed on behalf of customers.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. So hold the mic. I'm going to start with the question. So given the number of questions, the depth of the topic, I'm planning to ask each panelist, or probably two of them, one question. That way there is a variety that we actually go across. Mark, the question I would like to start with is the big data analytics in the cloud. Is it actually a business question or it's an infrastructure decision?
Well, I'll play the political answer and say it depends, right? As a technologist, I would like to say the business shouldn't care as long as they get the infrastructure and the service and the capability delivered, better, faster, and cheaper. The reality is, it is the lines between, especially in the analytics space, and actually in many of the spaces we talked about, the broader term of digital earlier and yesterday. The lines are blurred between business and technology functions. So I would say they're both involved. They both have a say in the game. And really, it partially comes down to, somebody mentioned, things like security. There's cost concerns. And ultimately, for us, I can just speak for me, is that it's an optimization of those two, with time being the most important, right? Because getting something out the door quickly is ultimately what we're trying to do, getting that value in the hands of customers quickly.
Vamshi, I could.
So, yeah, great question. And I'd echo some of the themes that Mark raised, right? So, in my mind, when you make the decision to do analytics on the cloud, it almost always starts, in most cases, with a business problem you're looking to solve. Because one of the things we found a lot of success with in working with clients is defining the value proposition for whatever implementation they're doing on the cloud upfront, which is, what are the drivers that the board's going to be interested in? So, for instance, let's talk about projects on one or two different prongs, right? If you have a project that does faster underwriting, so what are the metrics that the board cares about or the business cares about? And they've got to be smart metrics, so they got to be quantifiable, which is higher number of, increased rate of cross-sell, or 40% more uptake of campaigns, whatever have you, right? And once you have that defined, everything kind of works backward from that in terms of, okay, we've got the business case defined, and there's buy-in at the business level. Now, what do we do from a culture standpoint? So how are we going to build these capabilities, either in-house or in the cloud? And how are we going to have the appropriate data governance in place? And the final point is, from an analytics standpoint, absolutely, cloud gives you, as Mark said, a lot of agility, right? You can just provision the servers, get them out there. At some of the credit unions we work with in Canada and the States, it could take up to 2 or 3 weeks to get a server with the appropriate configuration, all that great stuff. And big data is about more machines. It's a horizontally scaled architecture. But the cloud can really cut that because it's self-service, and a click of a button, you get what you care about. I know Ant spoke about platforms. One of the biggest advantages of using cloud is you get a stack that's got an entire platform, API management, big data, middleware, at the click of a button, right? But again, once you have that, if anyone's telling you that analytics are something you could just buy from a cloud provider, they're lying. Data science, machine learning, deep learning, you need to invest in the capabilities from a data science statistical standpoint. And the people that are eventually creating these applications on top of the cloud on a big data platform need to understand what is driving the business, what are the features in that project, for instance, a marketing segmentation project or a customer attrition project. They have to understand and know what kind of features are present in a customer who retreat to basically even create a clustering algorithm or whatever that they need to do. So again, it's a complex challenge based on how big the project is, but it starts with the business value proposition, and you work backwards from there.
Thank you. Very interesting. So this question I would like to ask Matt. 1 or 2 examples that you've really seen where the big data and cloud drove a great value for the organization, especially to this size.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's actually the cloud helps specifically smaller organizations take advantage of a scale they typically can't get access to. My favorite story right now, not related to this industry, but there's a software company that builds software for power companies, and they're based in Norway. And what they want to be able to do is they want to make it easier to inspect power lines. The way you inspect a power line right now is you stick a bunch of folks in a helicopter and then you fly it near the power lines. This is problematic for 2 reasons. Helicopters are very expensive, and you're flying people close to power lines. And what they want to be able to do is they now have a set of drones that they can fly. And they want to do, originally they just had the drones and they were streaming the video back, and they had a room like about this size with a bunch of, recent college graduates sitting in front of screens watching video of power lines and saying, oh, there's something wrong here. Okay, so we've fixed part of the problem. We don't have folks in a helicopter near power lines, but we're not incredibly efficient. And so what they actually did is they worked with some data scientists that we have here doing a bunch of really fancy deep learning stuff in order to start building vision recognition algorithms that they can deploy so that you can actually, the drones can recognize this is where there's a branch over a power line, or this is where a transformer is going to fail. And if you think about the amount of computing power that they would have needed, there was no way that they would have deployed a 200-node GPU cluster on premises. Like, who would they have gone to and said, hey, boss, we just need to stick 200 high-end NVIDIA servers in the data center? You don't worry about that, right? But they were able to come to Azure and deploy that on top of the GPUs, get that scale for the time that they needed it, and then move on. And to me, where I see smaller organizations is when they want this type of scale to take advantage of that on demand, because they don't have to pay for a 500-node Hadoop cluster 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They need it when they run year-end over all of the last 5 years' worth of data, projecting out the next 5. But that's the 3 days that they need that amount of capacity. And so I actually think it's more of an enabler. If you think about some very, very large enterprises, they have the funding. They're in the data center business. Most folks don't want to be in that business. And we are, as well as some of the other folks.
Yeah, it's some of the panelists mentioned. We don't want to be. We took that decision because we didn't want to be in the data center business, and the scale that the Azure provides and the elasticity that the cloud provides is what attracted us towards the cloud. And some of the other things that we do otherwise from an IT organization perspective are being done in any of the cloud providers, like patching and ensuring that the infrastructure is available 100% of the time. It's all being done. So all that we do is just enable that and be able to take advantage of it. So this has considerably brought the time down in terms of standing up an infrastructure, and the elasticity in terms of how long do we want to retain the server, right? And it brings in discipline in our organization as well. I'm kind of talking a little generic here, and the reason is because we're just not using cloud for analytics. We're also using it for rest of the other applications as well. So this kind of has brought in some discipline in terms of how do we sustain the growth and how do we ensure that it is being done in the right way and don't have those servers and instances unnecessarily if they are not required, right? So that is the biggest advantage that we see in terms of going towards cloud. And it helped immensely with analytics because of the fact that it has lots and lots of data. So we cannot have all those servers up and running for a long time. So the elasticity in terms of when we require additional instances and additional servers and when to kind of taper them down are all the advantages that we see. And the ability to spin up any servers and platform is the biggest advantage that we saw with Azure.
Excellent. So I also want to ask.
I think there's another aspect to that. I think, of course, cloud provides that agility, but I think for most of the people, you may want to touch on our journey of getting started, getting up to that point, because I think there is a whole process, right, around how you got started to a point where we are mature enough as an organization that we are able to take advantage of the elasticity.
Sure. Thanks, Naveen. Thanks for setting this. Yes, we started this journey about a couple of years ago. We looked at different options. We looked at a colo, we looked at on-prem, expanding our infrastructure, and we also started to look at cloud. Cloud from the standpoint of private cloud, public cloud, and hybrid as well. So this is how we started our journey. It was a pretty wide thing that we started to look at. And as we started exploring options and when we started bringing the options down, and our perspective changed when we looked at cloud, because public cloud in general is a playground, right? You might have a gaming system next to you and you may have somebody else who will be running. So you don't have a say over where your infrastructure is going to be. But apparently what we learned through this journey is that even though it is the case, we can control our environment. How do we control our environment? As I give an analogy of building a home. So cloud, a public cloud in my mind is like a land, right? And how do we start building on top of it? How do we kind of set security around? They were all with us. And some of the cloud providers were able to help us and work with us in ensuring that this is what our requirement is going to be, and they were able to go a step further and help us on that, right? So that's how it started. And finally, we kind of eliminated the on-prem, eliminated the colo, because we still own the infrastructure and they have to go through the capital investment cycle. And one of the other advantages that we saw with public cloud or a cloud is that if we have to expand and if we project it right, we will be able to kind of expand relatively pretty quickly. We don't have to procure. All that we need is given a request, or even sometimes you don't have to, even with Microsoft Azure, all that you need to do is fill up a form, in a lack of better term, so you can get access to those systems pretty quickly. And the security, the concern that we had from a security standpoint were all kind of reduced, and it started coming down because we still had the ability to host the security in the way that we wanted to host. Like, how do we do it in on-prem? Because there are some competing products available from a security standpoint, and you don't have to buy those appliances. They're all software-defined appliances. So our firewalls, all the security-related things that guard our area in the public cloud were all available. So it was exactly the same way as what we had from an on-prem perspective, except for the fact that we don't see them. It is available somewhere else, and it helped us. It definitely helped us from that perspective, and that's how we started looking at. Once we got into the cloud, there were like various options available: Amazon, Azure, HP, and all those different cloud providers that were available. So we finally narrowed down to Azure because of the fact that they had the governance that we expect from a financial industry perspective. So there were some regulations and compliances, some audit reports and so on that needs to be as part of we being compliant. And we know that we are all governed by the NCUA and we go through all those IT audits. We do have a lot of audit things that we do. So Microsoft was willing to help us in terms of getting over there. And that's how we picked up Microsoft Azure. And we started analytics as our first application with Azure. And the reason why we chose analytics is because of the fact that it helps us to understand the data. It helps us in terms of how do we ramp up and ramp down the servers. It helps us from a performance standpoint. And it helps us to understand the entire Azure landscape as to what are all the issues that we may face or what are all the things that we need to watch for before we can migrate all our production applications.
Excellent. In fact, it's not an easy choice at all, right? If you see the landscape here, okay, there are too many choices, okay, and how do you even start? I mean, how do you basically go ahead and choose it? It's easier said than done. Very well summarized, Kalyan.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one more thing, just following on that. I think one of the reasons the analytics workload, and in particular the big data workload, is very affinitized to the public cloud is, and you can certainly tell stories about this, but when people get hooked on data, it's explosive. It transforms the way everyone thinks, and we've seen this inside of Microsoft. We run this really giant system called Cosmos. It runs on hundreds of thousands of machines. It occupies 2 giant data centers out in the desert somewhere. And it has all of our information. It has our copy of the internet that we build Bing on top of. And it was really interesting. We one time went and made a capacity request, and at the amount of hardware that we have to buy, we go to the board in order to say this is the size of the check we have to write. And we said, this is going to last us for 5 years. And I think in 8 months, we had used up all the capacity because people just exploded with, I want to produce more data. And it was not just data that we were getting inside, it was the data that people were then producing. And so if you don't plan for that, we'll talk to customers about doing big data. If you really get hooked on this, like, you will end up in the data center business.
Interesting. So I want to go back to Vamshi. From an analytics perspective, coming from Hortonworks, again as a general manager for financial services, especially for this size audience, what's the highest value that you have seen? Any examples?
So typically, where you might have smaller institutions, the value has been basically on the top line side, which is how do you increase your sales growth? How do you increase the number of products per customer? So you've had a customer who has a couple of basic accounts with you, and they've had a certain lifetime journey in their financial life. How do you kind of increase the number of products that the adoption that the customer has? So we've had credit unions that have built extremely interesting applications using analytics in the cloud. And one of the applications was basically a Customer 360 application. So what Matt said about data is absolutely true, right? It's a lot of times people go to the cloud because it's easier to get access to external data than it is to a lot of the internal data sitting in silos in your architecture. So I have a saying that Customer 360 is 180 plus 180. 180 internal historical data that's produced as a result of core banking transactions, credit card transactions, whatever it is the client's doing. But 180, the other stuff is the social media stuff, any other data sets you can gather about the customer to build that single picture, right? So the highest value in this segment that I've seen has been around building that customer journey, tracking that customer from a visualization standpoint. So when the customer walks into the branch, as Matt said, we have customers who are we have credit unions who have got motion detectors installed. which can basically do a lot of on-prem computing as well, facial recognition, traffic management, to help the agent understand when they're working with the client face-to-face, they see that complete picture. And the system also has analytics built in from a data science deep learning standpoint, which could tell the agent what the next best action for that customer is. So for instance, if a customer's moved their home, and that is maybe a trigger to sell them an insurance policy, or there's a rule. One of the largest providers of back office services to credit unions is a client of ours. I can't tell you who they are, but one of the rules that they've implemented is when a customer moves 10 miles away from a branch, they're about 60% probability of attrition. So you want to reach out to that customer proactively and then help them use their mobile banking application more, or point them to the next closer branch so that you still keep that relationship. So a lot of it would be customer segmentation, customer interaction, customer journey, and things of that nature.
All around customers. Very good. So I would like to ask this question to Matt. If analytics is the organization's secret sauce, all what you do with your data, it could be member data, customer data, and all the analysis, segmentation, like Vamshi said, right? So that's what you do. Is it really safe to keep it on cloud from a security perspective?
Yes.
Short answer,
So the answer is absolutely yes. And there's a couple of different paths to kind of walk down, I think, when we talk about this. When you look at the economic incentive that's in place for the big three cloud providers in order to protect the sanctity of our customers' data, it's just an absolutely massive amount of money. We internally, with the controls that we have, with the policies that we have, it is taken incredibly seriously because the drawback is if we mess up, it's not going to be just for one customer. Like it'll be the whole thing, and so there's just a massive economic incentive in place and we invest very, very heavily in that. The next level would be, as an extension of that, when you look at what we do around security, and there's a bunch of stuff you can go really to any of the cloud providers and go read what they do. Read what we go do when we run one of our data centers and compare that with your data center operations. In order for us to achieve the compliance certifications across every industry, government, healthcare, finance, the European Union, there's a bunch in Asia, there's some in Australia. We have to basically build for all of those compliance requirements and all of those security requirements. And so the things that we're doing generally are, probably on a per dollar basis, we're spending more than most anybody in the industry. And that's kind of one thing. The second thing that I would say is there also exists a set of data that some customers will never put in the cloud. That could be due to geopolitical compliance constraints. That could be due to internal compliance organizations. Healthcare is a really classic example. Patient identifiable information. There's a lot of healthcare companies that will not put it in the cloud. There's a lot of patterns that we see of that's fine, actually. It's going to be more cost effective. It's going to give you more options to land all the other data in the cloud. All of the data that's coming off the sensors when you're in a hospital room, that doesn't identify you. That's just a heartbeat. So great. Put that up in the cloud. Run your analytics on that. Go from really, really big data down to manageable data. And then pull that down and join that on-prem, right? And so that's the other pattern where the customer is really always in control. And so from that perspective, the IP that you go put in the cloud, in some ways that's been our business since day one, is people creating really unique IP that's theirs on our, on PCs and in the cloud. And, we take a lot of steps to go and protect that.
Interesting.
And I just wanted to add one more piece to it. There are encryption solutions available for data at rest, So it is not that we are exposing the data. So there are multiple solutions available. So that kind of is one more secure aspect of storing data in cloud.
So at least one of the question I was asked once, it's a very generic question to say, what if Amazon gets hacked? What if Azure gets hacked? What happens? Why it will never happen?
Yeah, so there's a software design principle around always assuming compromise, and so there's an entire software development, a secure software development lifecycle that we've built up over the years, running on-prem. We've extended it to the cloud, where there's a number of places where we will go and design, assuming bad actors. We will assume failures in certain layers that shouldn't fail. In order for me and my team to go ship any feature, we have to do a ridiculously complex 12-layer threat model and threat assessment that we then have to go and review. And this pushes on everything down to bits and pieces of the hardware, all the way up to even if a customer is compromised, what are the controls in place for the customer to get control back? And so every feature that we build, every service that we bring up, we're walking through this process. And in some ways, if you look at where things are going, just from a hardware innovation perspective, with the secure enclaves that Intel's starting to put on the chips, you can actually assume some really crazy things, like that there's an adversary who actually has compromised the host, and your data can still be secure because the host can't actually see the data that's being computed on. And this is, we're investing jointly with our hardware partners to deliver these types of things. And when we roll this out, the nice thing is we'll roll this out to the fleet of 40 some odd data centers around the world. So that security footprint will actually be ahead of where most of the industry is at, as folks are working through their own replacement and replenishment cycles.
And plus, we also have firewalls that we wanted very specifically built in terms of securing our environment. So it's a multi-layer security in my mind. So we control our area, and Microsoft, in terms of Azure, provides that secure environment as well.
So staying on the same line, what did you specifically do when you started the journey on the Microsoft Azure from a security perspective? What considerations did you keep in mind, being one of the first few credit unions to go into the Azure space?
Very good question. So we have, as we all financial institutions, we take security very seriously, right? So what we had was, we had firewalls, we had appliances designed and procured in certain way, right? So when we tried to look into the cloud platform, we tried to look at if these appliances can serve us, how can we migrate these things to the cloud environment? So there were options. We could physically take our firewalls and then host it on some of the cloud-based environments, which was an expensive affair. So we then looked into cloud-based firewalls. And in fact, most of the vendors that we work with do have cloud-based firewalls. If not, they were willing to work with us. So Palo Alto Network was one of the appliances that we use. So we took them over. We had solutions. We took them and we built exactly the way that we had built on-prem, but extended it a little bit more from a security perspective. We made it more secure, or we made our firewalls more tightened so that it adds an additional level of security. And the third thing that we did was, how do we access the Azure environment? We added multi-factor authentication, so we know exactly as to who is going to get into those environment. This is basically from an administration perspective. And we also monitor all the administration activities that happen. So we factored in all these things. And that was the first thing that we looked into when we were trying to start our journey towards the cloud-based solution.
Perfect. I would like to also hear Mark's thought on this security on cloud. As a customer, how do you feel?
Yeah, so, I think you can't take anything for granted. So, number one, the cloud providers wouldn't be in business if they didn't have some of the best security, right? What I've found in my evaluation is they're probably more secure than my own internal processes and practices. But that doesn't mean that I just stop there. I have to continually test, continually evaluate, and govern both the interaction and of the cloud provider with our own software development processes to make sure that we're taking advantage of the best that we can provide and the best the cloud providers also provide. So I think it's a cooperative effort, but it's just something you have to be continually vigilant about and never assume that you're done, never assume you're secure, never assume that you're ahead of the bad guys. You're just one step from an exposure of some kind or a breach or what have you, and you've got to be able to figure out when that occurs and then respond. So number one, I think they're as good as anybody could build themselves, and they're more efficient and effective at doing it. But you have to engage in this, and it's a business by business decision as to the data you put out there. And how you utilize the public cloud, but it's what I've found is it's very, very secure.
Thanks, Mark. Any question from audience?
Do any of you actually host your entire data center up in a public cloud? Sorry about that. Do any of you host your entire data center in a public cloud environment? I'm talking everything, core, PII, everything, or strictly only the analytical side.
So we started off with our analytics environment. We host our entire disaster recovery on public cloud. So it's a sort of production, but it has all the information. So our failover strategy is, in case of disaster, is to move to cloud, right? And the reason why we did that is because cloud migration is an experience and it has a lot of learnings to it, because there are different machine types that are available, and it actually identifies and signifies the speed and the response in terms of the infrastructure that is made available. So the only way by which we learned all these things is by migrating our disaster recovery, our environment into Azure and analytics, because it's a change in the mindset, because you can't have all your environment in a certain type of infrastructure, because it comes with a cost. So we had to ensure that the dev and QA are all installed in a specific type of infrastructure compared to production. So we have done all these things. So our objective is to roll our production and all our environment onto cloud in 2018. So we are on that journey of migrating towards cloud.
And I just add that we're about 75% all public cloud, and everything that we build going forward will be in a public cloud. We have some legacy that won't move. One's a government contract and a few other things that just from a cost point of view we wouldn't move. But everything new is moving in that direction.
Right, and maybe I have one nugget to add to that, right? Some of the themes that all three of them spoke about. Don't think of the cloud just as a container for your data or to push data out there. There's a lot of architectural goodness in the way the cloud providers, Azure and Amazon, have designed their cloud, right? So you look at the 9 or 10 principles of microservices. You'll see things like circuit breakers, which is when a certain part of the application has failed, how do you stop or is compromised, how do you stop that compromise? There's also things around Chaos Monkey in the Amazon world. I'm sure you guys have something similar in Azure. They constantly have these processes which go in and randomly take instances of applications down, and they want to see how the cloud provider's infrastructure and the application reacts. So even from a big data standpoint, I think what differentiates big data from an RDBMS or EDW is as an application architect, when I first started working on big data, I realized quickly this isn't just a platform to store data like you would do with a typical legacy technology, but there's actually a platform to run compute on the data. So with all the greatness present in the big data stack, if you look at the Hortonworks stack or any other stack, enterprise stack, you see about 25 components, right? You got the file system, you've got things like Spark, MapReduce, Hive, Pig, the whole range of technologies there. To solve actual business problems, you probably need 2 or 3 of those technologies. So again, it's very important right up front to do the architectural due diligence. Is if I'm going to go create these apps in the cloud, what components am I going to use, and what's my blueprint look like? And then what does the security kind of look from that standpoint?
Excellent. So we're on a 15-minute mark before we end the session. I have 3 important questions to ask. I may want to kind of go specific here. I would like to start this with Naveen. So going, especially for analytics, onto the cloud, from a process governance standpoint, what was your experience? What kind of changes have to be put in place so that it works seamlessly as you move from on-prem to cloud?
Sure. So I think when we are making those decisions about cloud, on-prem, or big data, RDBMS, I see that it is almost like a spectrum. That on one end of the spectrum is on-prem and RDBMS, and on the other end of the spectrum is cloud and Hadoop big data, right? So when we are working closely with business, are we looking to solve the problems of today, and what speed do we really want to solve at? Like, of course, as we went through our cloud journey, there was challenges, right? It was the first time we were doing it. We had some processes that needed to be defined. We had some network performance, security challenges. And given that we were doing it for the first time and analytics was the first application to be ported on the cloud, we had to work very closely with Kalyana's team to make sure that we are able to go over those hurdles. So if we look very specifically from the timeline perspective, did it get impacted? I would say yes, it definitely slowed us down. But at what expense did it slow us down? So to give an example, at one point we were having some performance issues with ingesting the data into Hadoop, and we worked closely with the support, and your support, by the way, has been really good. So we got a recommendation to basically tune up those servers. So we reached out to Kalyana's team, and Steve Hamilton actually, he said, okay, I will do that. And tell me, give me 10 minutes window, and I will just bump those servers from D3 to D13, which basically increases the RAM by 4 times. And so then what happened is that he was doing it for the first time. So he said, let me just at least try out the wizard, what it looks like. And in that process, he actually just upgraded it. And for us, it was a blip where those machines were not available for a minute, but he didn't even realize that he has already moved those servers. So once it is set up, the speed and agility is there. But until that point that you really get to that point, of course, there is a struggle, right? And I think same thing applies even to big data stack, right? Because as you were saying, when we started on this journey, do we really want to make all those decisions about how much data we are going to pull? How should we size up the database now, or should we do it as we go, right? And in our situation, we said, you know what? Let's make those, because we are not doing or building this solution for today. We are building this thing for 3 to 5 years. And let's do those type of things as we go. There is going to be an initial pain. Of course, there was a pain. And once we go through this learning process, then the things will become a lot more easier for us.
Excellent. So we may not have time to continue on this. I want to change the question. Mark, I would like to start this question with you. From a cost predictability standpoint, what metrics have you tracked, and how do you make sure the cost promises of cloud is working?
Well, I think the broad brush answer is kind of like your answer on data, right? Once it's available, what you find is the consumption will skyrocket, and so does your cost. And so you do have to keep track of your usage, what applications, products, projects, down to the developer. You've got to have the kind of metrics that you can report back to your organization up and as well to your finance organization. We're growing probably about 15% a year. We're spending over $1 million a month on public cloud, and it's growing quite a bit. So you do have to manage the overall cost. You do have to understand when and can you turn off certain services so you can save money. And that's a discipline. It's a process and a governance model that you have to have in place, and you have to learn how to do that, and it just doesn't happen automatically. The cloud providers actually provide services to help you optimize and manage the spend and usage because they want you to get value. But honestly, you have to take it on yourself, and that's the way we've done it. We actually go through a monthly review of all of our spend, and we go through every product, and then we look at all the different services across the public cloud that we're consuming, and we actually trend all that, and we try to come up with reasonable forecasts that we can hold ourselves accountable to. So it's not a perfect science, and when you get to law of big numbers, it's a bit more troublesome to do, but it's a huge important task.
Right. I want to ask a slightly different twist to the same question to Kalyan. From a capacity planning, right? How capacity planning plays when it comes to the costing, and what did you learn in terms of planning the capacity when you started the journey?
Yeah, I love this question, and the reason is because infrastructure on-prem is always assumed that you have everything available and infrastructure is just available and you can anyway be able to do all those things, right? It changed when we migrated to cloud, because now with any projects, with any efforts, we are able to say that this is how much it takes to stand up an infrastructure. There's a cost element involved in it, right? So what that does is brings in discipline within the IT organization. So it is based on the number of projects that we have got. It is based on the growth that we see. So now some of my IT folks have become analytical person. So basically they try to trend based on some of the growth, based on the projects, in terms of trying to predict what should be the capacity and how much infrastructure is required. And plus, also there is a cost factor involved with the type of infrastructure that is available in cloud. So we have to make sure that we assign and utilize appropriate infrastructures in place. And most importantly, how do we turn the services down, to Mark's point, once a project has been rolled out into production, so you don't keep any of those environments to perpetuity, right? So to answer your question, the capacity planning is a discipline that we started and our folks started to adopt. And this also goes back to some of our compliance and audit-related things where we should be able to predict our capacity. So this is bringing in that discipline. So there are a lot of positive things that we have learned in terms of migrating to the cloud.
Excellent. Did you want to share?
There is one more thing. I think, what about the discipline from the business point of view? Because as a business user of analytics, now I am actually getting to see how much we are spending every month, and I am trying to see how we can use the cloud elasticity of Hortonworks to see how our monthly bill gets reduced, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It is that the project accounting takes a big step here, right? It becomes much more visible. The infrastructure costs are much more visible, and it helps us from that perspective. So we have a complete visibility with being able to project and predict what the growth should be and what the growth could be and the cost associated to it.
Any lesson learned you want to share from your journey?
Yes.
This will probably be the last question. So if you could all quickly chime in from your
Sure.
perspective, then we'll open it for audience. I at least want to give a few minutes for them.
Yeah, lessons learned were in terms of understanding the environment, right? So it's a transformation, it's a cultural change because our folks don't get to feel the infrastructure like what they used to do from an on-prem perspective. It helped us, it helped us to transform our engineers to think about and plan more before they go spin off any infrastructure, right? So there were a lot of lessons learned. So we had to learn Azure, we had to learn security, we had to learn how to work in Azure, we had to learn what kind of infrastructure that is available, we had to learn about what are all the patching cycle from the Microsoft so that we know when not to do certain things. So one of the biggest takeaway is the ability to plan, and our engineers are forced to plan and think much more in the future is what is the biggest learning for us.
Thanks. We're on a 4-minute mark. Vamshi, do you have a perspective?
Actually, I think it brings a discipline in our side as well, because what happens is that when we, from the analytics point of view, we had to redefine those processes, right? Because Azure was a new platform, security was new, and we have to be a lot more pre-planning in terms of making sure we provide our requirements appropriately to IT. But at the same time, I think the key success here is to have the partners aligned, because I think where we are today, we could not have been there without support from you and you guys, because it was very important, because there were challenges and we had to make sure that our partners are there to help get over those humps.
Sure.
Thank you, Naveen and Kalyan. I appreciate that. So, from a learning standpoint, right, at a global level, there's probably 4 buckets that you all need to be cognizant about. The first one, I think, is around the business value. Why are you going to the cloud, and why are you running big data in the cloud? What's your analytics payback? And are you going after the projects that will give you the most bang for the buck, the most juice for the squeeze, right, so to speak? And there's no one right answer. It depends on the organization. For most, it might be customer retention, better customer upsell, marketing type activities. For others, it might be risk data aggregation, compliance, whatever have you, right? So having that executive point of view before you embark on the journey, more due diligence is better than less, right? Number one. The second aspect is typically governance. So when you get data and you put it into a data lake, which is a term for a Hadoop area of data storage, and one of the things that Matt and I'll tell you is in some of the public clouds out there, there's a neglect of data governance, which is when I bring data into the lake, am I able to tag the data? Am I able to audit the data? Am I able to set appropriate lineage policies so that when this data is used as a way to produce business reports, you're compliant and you're able to show the regulators that you followed end-to-end traceability. That's extremely important. The third area, I think, is skills, right? You're building out, this is all about organizational change and transformation. Let's not kid ourselves. So when you have that type of a model, from a development standpoint, are you moving to DevOps? Are you moving to cloud native? If you are, how does it segue with big data and analytics on the cloud? So what are you doing investing your big data capabilities, your analysts, your data scientists? How are they working with your developers and the infrastructure? And how's the whole agile model working? And the fourth, I think, is really around the technology architecture. Are you making the right decisions in terms of the ingestion of the data? So Naveen mentioned performance problems. What are the multitude of resources I'm going after? Am I collecting clickstream data from my website? Am I collecting a whole bunch of batch data? Am I collecting sensor data? Am I collecting motion data? So having the appropriate architecture in place to create a multi-tenant lake so that you don't have to kind of rejigger for every new application, I think is key. So whatever you're building, as Naveen says, it's just not for today's challenges, but also tomorrow's problems.
Very comprehensive. We have exactly having
I'll
1 minute.
be super quick.
Yeah.
So I have a massive bias for the cloud, so I'm not even going to say anything else about that. I would just say when I look at customer projects, the thing that causes them to fail is really poor definition of the business problem and the value that you're trying to create. Rolling in and saying, hey, I want 3 Hadoops and expecting them to go do something magical, it's not going to happen. And so pick a concrete problem, pick something that you've got skills with the people you have or with your partners, and go tackle that and go get some value there and then go down the path from that. All the other stuff, the cloud infrastructure is great. Yay.
Mark, having gone through it several times, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, the only thing I would say beyond that is just there is a crossover point in terms of your ability to scale, and I think, for me, my core competency is really not in the data center business. I don't want it to be in the data center business. Maybe I inherited some of that, but that's not a business I want to be in, nor does my company. So I'm trusting in these partners, and I think, again, as I started in the very beginning, it is about that partnership, and we got to hold each other accountable.
Thank you. I think very, very, very insightful. I will open it up for audience for 2 questions. Anything that's not covered that you would like to bring up and ask? Excellent. Okay, there's a question.
So a lot of talk about moving to the cloud through the analytics that's coming from a business perspective or from the IT perspective, finding things out. Have you guys had any experience having to pull back from the cloud to on-prem?
Great question. So this happened at a bank that I can't obviously name for confidentiality reasons. But they initially went headfirst into the cloud without, I guess in my mind, having a quantifiable business challenge they wanted to go after. The intention was to basically enable data scientists to access the richest amount of data they could find and all that good stuff, right? And they went to the cloud, and then they started running into issues in terms of how they designed the initial upfront architecture. Again, not so much a problem with the cloud provider as how they designed it. So when the cloud is just a different container for where you're running your applications in some ways. And when you create a data architecture and you're basically, you're schlepping, 4 terabytes of data, you still have to follow all the appropriate design considerations in terms of how you architect the different zones in the lake, if you will, on the cloud. And once they had security involved as well, internal security, they ran into all sorts of issues with obfuscation of certain fields. The data scientists wanted to get access to all the data they could find, date of birth, for instance, which is PII, right? And the IT team would go in there and certain zones in the cloud run a job which would blank some of that out. And, if you don't have access to certain of those fields and that the governance process internally has not been well defined, the project would fail. And that's exactly what happened, right? So they pulled data back, and then they went through basically better design and more due diligence. And then they perfected the process in-house, and then they moved a little bit of market risk calculations, the portfolio calculations, risk calculations onto the cloud.
Any other question?
We have a question from the audience. For a financial institute, what is the main criteria to decide between public versus private cloud?
So I can take a stab at this.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
So I worked at Red Hat, where we had OpenStack. And that was a great big thing, right? In my mind, again, this is a little controversial, am I saying this? Other than the biggest and the largest mega banks, I haven't seen a lot of banks be able to pull out private cloud strategies. Again, I'm talking about a cloud. I'm not talking about a VM where you're just spinning up, virtualized, Hyper-V or VMware or KVM, whatever have you. In my mind, the public cloud now is gotten to a point of such strength from security, compliance, they're all SOX compliant, PCI compliant, and architectural goodness, that in my mind, if I were a banking executive, I would decide to go public cloud first. Again, it's a bit of a controversial opinion, but
Would anybody else want to pitch in?
Sure. And in my mind, it's the mindset. I don't think public cloud offers anything less. If not, it offers more in all aspects in our experience. There is nothing that would stop any financial institution going towards cloud. The only challenge that I would say is the fundamental mindset has to change in terms of bringing in certain disciplines, because of the fact that in cloud, there are consequences of some of the actions that have been performed. But else for it, public cloud offers, in fact, more than what an on-prem infrastructure or on-prem solution could provide.
I want us to be very quick. You want to add something, Matt, on this? Perfect.
My opinion's probably pretty clear.
Okay, perfect. Cool. Any other questions that we're missing? So thank you. I think it was very, very comprehensive, wide variety, I think, representation from the big data company, the cloud company, and the customer perspective. Excellent. Thank you all for making.
Thank you, Balaji, and thank you for the panelists. I think hopefully that answered most of the concerns around the security on everybody's mind. So I think just one quick announcement. If you guys have not yet filled this survey, we would love to hear feedback. So please fill this up and leave it on the center of the table. We'll grab it after the summit. And I think take a little break. Sounds good. 15 minutes.